it's not something that we do. It's something that we can say on our system. We can say that our system is observable or that it's not observable, or how well can we observe our system.
Welcome to the DevSec for Scale podcast, the show that makes security a first-class citizen for growing companies. My name is Jeremy Hest, Head of Developer Relations at Achilles, the secrets management SaaS platform. Welcome back to the DevSec for Scale podcast. With me today is Yosef Arbiv. He's engineering group leader at Epsagon, which was acquired by Cisco. And Yosef, it's good to see you again. Last time we saw each other was at DevOps Days Tel Aviv, where you actually gave an Ignite talk on why we write code that we don't need and what the costs are of that code. So it was a great, fun Ignite, and we had a good time. So
thank you, Jeremy.
That was awesome. So it's good to have you. And we're going to be talking about observability and some of the practices around observability and monitoring. Let's kick it off right away with a question before we get into more about you. What is observability? Give us the lowdown.
Yeah, so observability is more of a property of a system. So observability is is a measure of how well the internal state of a system can be inferred from the external outputs of this system. Okay, so let's say we have a website or whatever system that we have. It can be in one of many different states, right? Either everything is working as it should be, or maybe you have some issue with the database. Maybe you have errors on the system. Maybe we don't have any error yet, but if we will have a couple of more users, things start falling apart, right? So we want to be able to know what the exact state of the system is by looking on the outputs, on the signals that the system produces. So that's observability in a nutshell.
Great. Do you have a quick example of something to apply observability to? So you mentioned a database. What would be an example of something that would throw you an error or some notification that something is off?
So when we're talking on alerts, right? That's your question, right? Which part of the system do we want to set alerts on? So basically, we want to collect metrics from different aspects of our systems, right? We want to collect business metrics, and you want to collect development metrics, right? You want to collect the number of errors, the saturation of the system, the duration of requests, and so on. And then we can set alerts on those metrics. So if we have too many errors, for say, or if we have the duration is getting too high, so then we can put alerts on these metrics, and then we can know that something is wrong in the system. So this is the first example, the very basic example of having observability measures or observability practices for our systems.
Great, fantastic. So let's go back a little bit, and why don't you go ahead and just tell us a little about what you're doing now and a little bit about your background.
Okay, great. So I'm married to Adi. I'm a father of 3 amazing young boys. So that's the most important thing, right? About myself. Other than that, I have 12 years of experience as a software engineer and as a team leader. Currently, I'm an engineering group leader at Cisco. My group is responsible for developing the Open Telemetry SDKs. We are a part of the open source community that builds Open Telemetry, which is an open source project for observability. Maybe we can get back to that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So let's go back to a little bit more about implementation. So how does implementing good observability practices benefit an organization?
So as a software engineering group or SRE group, we want to be able to understand what is going on our systems, right? We want to be able to know if there's an error on our system, on the best case before our customers know it, right? Or at least as soon as possible. And we want to be able to react to those failures in our systems on the most effective way. We want to waste as much, we want to be able to fix the error as soon as we can. We don't want to waste time digging in the different logs on different services in our system. We want to have systems that will work for us and will make our life easier when it comes to troubleshooting and monitoring our applications. So eventually having good measures of observability can help us decrease the response time for errors, spend less time troubleshooting issues, and eventually less time, eventually being able to build our application faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that we do around the software organization, the R&D organization, is to make sure we code faster and safer. So
Definitely.
It's great. Now, one of the things that we didn't have planned here actually is a question that came up in my head was, read a lot about observability versus monitoring. Monitoring, of course, is something that's been, a big thing for a longer period of time. And observability, I think, at least in my mind, is a newer concept, not brand new, but it's newer than just monitoring in general, but they're definitely different. Can you give us a little, bit about what makes them different and both necessary?
Yeah, so I think those are a bit different terms. Monitoring is something that you do. We want to be able to monitor our systems, right? So we monitor our systems in order to understand what's happening inside our system. Observability is maybe a newer term, but it's not something that we do. It's something that we can say on our system. We can say that our system is observable or that it's not observable, or how well can we observe our system, right? So if we are able to have the right outputs from our systems, the right signals sent back to us from our systems, if we are able to have the right tools for analyzing those signals, for correlating logs from different services in our system, for correlating metrics to the traces to the logs, all of these can help us build systems that are observable. So when we are monitoring our system, we can do it more efficiently and better. So does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
And so the next question that I have then is, obviously this question comes up all the time, microservices, right? Everyone is using Kubernetes these days pretty much. And we're all really trying to move to that sort of architecture. So how has the game changed for observability with the introduction and growth of microservices in terms of, the difficulty in reaching, let's say just a container or something specific service inside of a container, and the amount of scale that you have with these microservices today?
Yeah. So like I said, observability is relevant for any kind of system, right? For any kind of system that we have, we want to know in which state the system is. We want to know if everything is working as it should be or not. But when it comes to microservices, the challenges become much more much harder. The first thing is that only to understand what exactly is our system, it can be very difficult to understand what are the different services that are a part of my system. What are the APIs that my system exposes? What are the requests that I'm getting? Which services participate in each flow? And eventually, if you go back to the definition of observability, what are the different states that my system can be in, right? this question becomes much more hard to answer. It's much more difficult to answer this question when you're talking about microservices architecture rather than a monolith. So this is the first challenge when we're talking about microservices. The second challenge is troubleshooting the system. Let's say that you have an alert from one of your microservices, or you have an alert that something is wrong. We have too many errors in our system. We need to understand what is the flow that causes this error, right? Then we need to go and to search into the different microservices that participate in this flow, and to try to understand which one of them causes this error. In order to do that, we have to correlate logs between different microservices. Now, each one of those microservices can be written in a different programming language. It can run on a different cloud provider, maybe, and correlating them can be very difficult. So we need systems that will help us dealing with this challenge. And the last thing is optimizing the system. Let's say you have a customer that complains that a certain flow in the system is not as fast as it should be. Again, you have to search what are the microservices that participate in this flow. Only then we can start to understand which one of them is the root cause for this behavior. And only then we can start fixing the actual issue. So these are the kind of challenges that we have when we are moving from a monolith to a microservices architecture.
Yeah, that sounds, the amount of data must be almost soul crushing when you think about how many systems are up at one time and constantly sending data, many different APIs, many different types of, so like, and how does that side work? Like, how do you kind of, keep that data clean? I mean, I know I'll say, like, I come from a different background. I actually come from more of a marketing background, and just data on prospects and customers and all that, even that information is difficult to keep clean. And imagine how much data comes in just from every API call is significant. So it must be, much more difficult and much more messy. So how do you keep those things clean?
That's a great question. So the first thing is that eventually we want to be able to use unified systems, right? We don't want our data to be separated into different systems. We want as much of the data to be sent to a single system eventually. And we want to add to our logs identifiers that can help us search in those logs, right? So like customer ID, transaction ID, and so on. So we can index them and we can search for them later when we need to access those logs. And by the way, this is where Open Telemetry comes to help us, because when we have so much different systems, it becomes a great challenge for the teams that operate the system, and it becomes a headache for to understand where are the logs. Maybe I need a different system to access these microservice traces. So this is where Open Telemetry standardized the market and tried to create a standard way of creating this data and sending this data.
Yeah, well, that was the next question, of course, right?
Yeah.
Definitely, that was an easy segue that you already got to. So your team contributes code, as you mentioned earlier, when you were talking a little bit about yourself and what you guys do. So where was the Open Telemetry project born? What was the problem it was trying to solve?
Yeah, so Open Telemetry was born about 3 years ago as a merger of two previous open source projects that were dealing with telemetry data generation and collection. So Open Telemetry is an open source project of the CNCF, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. There are many different companies in the industry that are supporting this project. Of course, we at Cisco and many other big companies are supporting and contributing to this project. And the idea is to have a standard way of collecting data and generating data from your application. So let's say that you have a system that is built with the microservices architecture. So you have a lot of different services. Each one of them can be using a different programming language, right? But eventually you want the data to be unified, like you said. You want it to look to be similar. You want to be able to correlate the data between the microservices. And another thing that you want is that you don't want to change all of your microservices if you want to use a different vendor, right, for alerting, let's say, or for metrics. So this is where the different vendors decided to join forces and to create a standard way of generating this data. So how do I create a span? How do I create a trace? What does a metric look like? How do I send all of this data from my application to whatever backend I'm using for observability? So this is what Open Telemetry is about. So eventually, Open Telemetry has API and SDKs for every programming language, which define how the telemetry data is created, and there are also libraries for automatic instrumentation, and that means that you can automatically generate this telemetry data without needing to actually write, without changing any line of code in your application. So you can just configure your let's say, your Lambda function or your Java microservice to work with Open Telemetry, and then Open Telemetry itself instrument the different calls to other microservices, the interesting operation that happens in your system, and create metrics and traces for those operations. And then you can collect all of them to a single backend, and this can be one of many different vendors that create backends for Open Telemetry. And then you can use those backends to monitor and troubleshoot your application.
So let's get to the security aspect of all of this. This is more of a security podcast, and telemetry and observability, metrics, logs, all that stuff is super important for any organization, not just from a business level, not just from a speed of coding level, but also security needs to be kept in mind at all times for the safety of the organization. So what is observability? Where do observability and security intersect?
Yeah, so I think that first, when you want to build a secure system, you have to know what your system is built of, right? So this is the first step where observability is important when you're talking about security. We have to know what are the services that participate in our system, that take part in our system, right? We have to know what are the APIs that our system exposes, who uses those APIs. All of these can be done with observability tools. So this is the first thing that comes in mind when we're talking about observability and security. Understanding our system is the first step of building a secured system, I think. And the next thing I can think of is when it comes to investigating security issues on your system. So this is very similar to investigating bugs, right? or having to optimize your system. You want to be able to understand what exactly happened during this security incident. You want to be able to understand what are the different microservices that took part in this data breach, let's say. You have to be able to correlate logs between those different services. So if you don't have the right tools for doing that, it will take you a lot of time, and I don't think that you'll be able to do it in the right way eventually. So having the right tools for observability can benefit your organization tremendously when it comes to investigating security issues.
Can you actually reach an understanding of, let's say, some sort of security breach within? We hear, there are so many different kinds of breaches, especially lately, which we're hearing about and more. Are those things actually able to be recognized through observability platforms and observability tools, or is that something that's maybe just sort of like a cybersecurity, you need a command center for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I'm not sure regarding if you're talking about getting to know that a security breach happened or to investigate a security issue.
Well, I guess both, right? So there's the actual penetration of a system, and then there's recognizing that something happened afterwards and figuring out what the failure was. I assume that figuring out what the failure was, that stuff is all there. But what about sort of almost real-time observability? Is there a thing such as real-time observability?
Yeah, definitely. So at Epsagon and at Cisco, we are building the tools just for that, for real-time observability. Our systems work with your production environment, and our libraries, the Open Telemetry libraries, send data from production environment, and you can see in Epsagon and in AppDynamics, which is a Cisco solution, you can see the actual system in production. So that's definitely something that we are working on, and an inherent part of observability. Regarding security breach, I think that usually our systems are built for monitoring, and the alerts and metrics are more targeted for business metrics and for development metrics. So you want to make sure that everything is working fine and so on. And it's less relevant, I think, for understanding that a security breach happened. But I think that for investigating a security issue, this is definitely a place where if you have the right systems, you can do it much more efficiently. And you can get a very better understanding of what exactly was the security breach, and maybe even what are the development aspect that were not taken into consideration when building your systems that allowed the security breach to happen, right? So if you have the right tools for observability, it can definitely benefit you when you are investigating a security issue.
Got it. So it's been awesome, and I have one last question. Where can everyone find more information about Open Telemetry? How can they get started, and how can people reach you?
If you want to start looking into Open Telemetry, you can find it on opentelemetry.io, which is the official website of Open Telemetry. You can find there documentation on how to get started with Open Telemetry, how to use the Open Telemetry libraries for your exact use case. If you want to use it for metrics or for traces, so it's all there. you can search for AppDynamics Cloud, which is a solution that we are building at Cisco for observability. And if you want to reach out for me, I'm available at Twitter and at LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to hear to answer any questions that you may have about observability and Open Telemetry in particular.
Great. What's your handle on Twitter?
It's Yosef Arbiv, so it's an easy one.
It's confusing.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yosef, thank you so much. It was great to have you on. This was a really interesting talk. I learned a lot more about observability, so I'm happy. And
thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I think our listeners will be happy with it too. So thanks so much. And like I say at the end of all the episodes, stay secure. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye.